Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another review. Today I'm reviewing a film that, as of the day I'm recording this, probably uploaded the same day actually, just came out. It's a film I originally didn't have any intention to see in theaters, but it's a last minute thing. It's brought up in one of my friends, specifically LJ. He's like, oh, let's go see it. So we did. I saw it with LJ and Jeff. It, of course, is the spin-off of the horror film that surprised me last year, The Conjuring. It is, of course, Annabelle, which, of course, you could tell this is a prequel about the doll that they mentioned at the beginning of The Conjuring. And initially, when I heard about this, I'm like, really? You need to do a prequel about that? It's going to be pointless and a useless prequel. And I still stand by part of that statement that this film, in the grand scheme of things, continuity-wise, is kind of pointless. And it's definitely not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but I'll say, well, it didn't surprise me as much as The Conjuring did. I enjoyed it to a point, but I do have to agree with the Rotten Tomatoes thing on here, which I will get to in a second. On IMDb, the film has a 6.2, which personally I think that is a little too high, but the film just came out, so I'm going to give it a little bit of flack. I'll give it a little bit of leeway there. If it's still there by the end of the year, or by this time next year, then okay, my taste definitely a lot different than the mainstream audience when it comes to films like this. 61 with the audience, 29% with the critics. Now, it's a little bit of a, I'm a little bit at I don't know what the proper word for it is, but I guess I'm in the middle of the road here. I don't think it deserves as low as what the critics are giving it, but I think it doesn't deserve as high as them. I think maybe more like around a 55 probably be a little bit more appropriate. That's just me. Here's the consensus. Annabelle borrows unabashedly from better horror films, which I do agree with that, content to leave viewers with a string of cheap jolts that fail to build on the far more effective The Conjuring. I agree with that to a point, but I still think parts of the film are effective, more so if you are a religious person, me not being that. Even it doesn't affect me that much like that, but from being around a lot of religious people, I can see why it might affect others. Not to the point that, let's say, people back when The Exorcist were released reacted. Well, at least in this country, I think other countries might be more affected by it. Like, from what I hear, I think it was the Philippines, they actually had to have Catholic priests on standby during showings of The Conjuring. I guess shows the difference in how faith affects people's everyday lives in other countries. But I'll say the film is well shot, and that's funny considering who directed the film. If you're wondering, it is directed by John R. Leonetti, which I'm just double checking to make sure I read. He was the director of Mortal Kombat Annihilation and The Butterfly Effect 2. Of course, he's worked on other films, but this apparently is only his third theatrical release, which, with his first film, you can probably see why. He also worked as a cinematographer on films like Hot Shots, Part Dukes, The Mask, the original Mortal Kombat, which explains why he got the directing job of the sequel, Spy Hard, Detroit Rock City, The Scorpion King, Child's Play 3, Dead Silence, I Know Who Killed Me, Piranha 3D, Insidious, which I guess explains why the demon reminds me of something, and Insidious 2. I'm guessing he also was a cinematographer on The Conjuring, which I guess gets him this job. He'd probably better stick to cinematography, which probably the best thing about this movie is that since he started as a cinematographer, the shots do move pretty well, especially when it's trying to build tension. But since he seems to be a cinematographer first and a director second, he probably could pace things out a little bit better. But since he's worked with actors and all this before, he does know how to at least competently get good performances out of his actors. But then again, it could also be the actors. I mean, the priest in the movie is played by Tony Amendola, who I recognize from the Zorro movies that Hollywood did a decade or so ago. The Mask of Zorro and The Legend of Zorro, even though he played two completely different characters. And that's just what I remember him from. He's been in other stuff. episode of Once Upon a Time, among other stuff. I thought he did a pretty good job, Priest. Now, our lead actors are Annabelle Wallace. Kind of funny that the lead actress, female character is played by an actress named Annabelle in a film named Annabelle. And Ward Horton. I can't look up his because he doesn't have a page. I thought he was passable for what the character had to be, especially since he was a period piece. There were very, very subtle undertones of I don't know if sexism would be the right word in him, but there's a little bit of that, more so near the end when at first he thinks his wife might be going crazy, and then she brings up, seeing a shrink. Just the way the scene is set up, you're like, okay, now I see what they're talking about. Anyway, Annabelle, no, she was Amy in X-Men First Class, huh? Sarah, Snow White the Huntsman. She was in Body of Lies, True Lie. Also done TV work, Jericho. Diana, Last Days of a Princess. No, she didn't play Diana. She played Jane Seymour in 5 episodes of The Tudors. She was in the show Pan Am. Show The Musketeers. Fleming, the man who would be Bond. So she is an experienced actress, which I guess explains why I really got behind her character. And her character in the cinematography work are probably some of the best things about this film, and a close third would be the makeup effects on the demon, because yes, we do see the demon, we don't see him in his entirety, except of course when it's dark, which I think that works more to the film's credit, is that you don't see the demon up close, is that when you do see its entire body shot, it's in the dark, so it's like it keeps it in the dark, and the only time you see its face, it's I don't know if it's a close-up or a two-shot or in between, but you only see the face and a little bit, and the rest of the torso and all that is covered by the doll. I think that works. But for some weird reason, the demon makeup effect kind of reminded me of Wishmaster. I was almost expecting the demon to say to the character Mia, Annabelle's character, "As you wish," that whole thing. But anyway, the film, as you could probably already gather, and I've already mentioned a couple times, takes place before The Conjuring, but here's a weird thing. It does not involve the story that they mentioned in that film and that they mentioned at the beginning. The whole thing about the 2 nurses and the doll, the whole spirit thing. The movie begins with that, but then it takes place a year later. This is to show how the demon first came to be in contact with the doll. Now, the plot of the film is that John Gordon and his wife are expecting a baby, which turns out to be a baby girl that they name, I forget the daughter's name. I forget, but it rhymes with me. I think it's Leah or something like that. I picked up on that right away. I'm like, that's kind of cute, actually. Anyway, John has, as the film opens, he has found the perfect gift for his pregnant wife, Annabelle, which is a beautiful and rare vintage doll in a pure white wedding dress, which apparently is the last doll that his wife needed for this one weird collection she was starting. Anyway, the delight that they have, he finally found something that she'd been looking for a while. They're expecting a child, and he's about to finish medical school. All this is cut short one night when their home is invaded by members of a satanic cult who attack them. They survive, partially because they had attacked next door first and killed the inhabitants next door. And one thing I will say is that there's a little bit of foreshadowing to this, because in a couple scenes before this, they're watching TV while he's doing stuff. She's sewing, he's doing medical work, and on the news it's the report about the Manson family. When I saw that, I'm like, okay, this sets the year it's taking place in, and I was wondering, is this going to be foreshadowing something? Because at this point in the film, I'm still wondering, okay, are the nurses going to be in the film? And then, of course, when I saw that one of the shots was going towards the window, and you could see the neighbors through the window, I'm like, okay, they're gonna die. I've seen enough films, you know something's gonna happen, and I can't say I'm disappointed that it did. Well, apparently the cult that the people that attacked, one of them being the daughter of the neighbors, or a part of, was a satanic cult, and I think you can see where it's going from here, and yes, it does go there. That's all I'm going to say about that for those of you who haven't figured it out, because it's kind of easy to kind of figure out. It involves summoning something, that's all I'm saying, and through something it ends up in the doll. Well, from there, you know, it's the usual thing we've seen in a dozen movies involving possession and the supernatural. Things start happening, one of the characters notices it, and then in the end they have to bring the church into it, and not in quite the same way like in The Exorcist, but similar. And then eventually they're going to have to get rid of it, which I'm not going to spoil how they get rid of it and all that, but I thought it was interesting how they got rid of it from their life at least. But it's kind of sad because it led to the doll going to the people who had it in the next film, and yes, I'm ignoring the phone intentionally. So in that, it's on one hand it's good that they solved the problem, on the other hand it's sad because it continued on. Now the film is 98 minutes, and since we saw it at the later showing, I was a little tired, so maybe that's why I thought the film was a little bit longer than it turned out to be. But thinking back on it, it didn't really drag a lot, but there were a couple minor slow spots. But I think it was mostly to build tension, like one scene where Mia goes up into I think it's the attic part of the apartment complex they move into after the attacks. She's looking through their little, it's like a chain link fence part. I guess each tenant has one to put stuff that they can't keep in their room, in their apartment, or extra stuff. It's weird. I've never seen an apartment building like this other than one where they have a little garage. But anyway, I'm getting off track with that. And you can tell from that something's going to happen. Telemarketer, I'm just ignoring it, but you can tell something's going to happen, and it's going slow, and all I'm going to say with that's the first time we see the demon. That's all I'm saying with that. And there's a couple little funny moments in there, but it's kind of dark comedy just from how it's paced. That's all I'm going to say with that. And they do meet a female character named Evelyn. Double check and make sure this is the right character, because I really didn't associate the character with the name. I just went more based on, yes, her Evelyn, played by Frey Woodard. Which at first when I saw this character, I'm like, is she going to be connected to a cult or something? Because I was thinking Rosemary's Baby. Partially because not 100%, but for some reason Annabelle Wallace kind of reminded me of the actress from Rosemary's Baby. You know who it is. I can't think of her name off the top of my head. The original one, obviously. And I was thinking, are they going to go with that route with this film, bring in the cult more? Which I'm happy that they didn't, because that would have been a little bit too weird. Anyway, she's tied into the ending, that's all I'm going to say, and I think it was kind of fitting, because there was only one other alternative, really, and I'm not going to bring it up. For those of you who've seen the film, you probably already know what I'm talking about. Those of you who haven't or don't plan on it, I don't want to spoil it. I think, as the film goes on, you can probably guess what it's going to be, though. And there's actually one good scene where it does kind of fake you out to make you think that maybe Mia accidentally killed her daughter, which I'm not going to state the context of the scene or the scenes around it, but yeah, I think it was a pretty good fake-out scene, especially with how it's edited and how the cameras are angled, which for in between cuts. That's why I said, Leonardi, he's a good cinematographer, not as good as a director, but then again, could be the fact he's only directed a few things, and look at how many stuff he's done cinematography for. And it could be kind of like that whole, it could be a RoboCop 3 situation where the director's competent, but just one film screws up his career. And I really hate it when that happens. Anyway, nothing really much else to say about it. I mean, I wasn't scared. I mean, there was one part where I did actually jump a little bit, but that's because I didn't see something coming. And the other couple, there was other jump scares in it, which you kind of expected a supernatural movie like this. They didn't get me, but I'm like, okay, I could see why that could get some people, especially seeing a movie like this at night for the first time. But the thing that really drew me into the film was our lead characters, Mia and John. More so Mia, because she's more the lead than John is. She's kind of like the secondary lead. And what drew me into them at first was they're sitting in church, listening to church. You think, okay, they're going to be a normal church-going couple. Then the camera moves down. You know they're going to probably be holding hands. And they're thumb wrestling. It's just like, that's just a cool little wedding gesture. And to add to it, the couple that they are friends with that live next door to them, that husband asks them who won. A little bit thing. So I was sold on the characters from the get-go with that, which is why I was thinking, am I going to want to smack John when he was kind of doing that little, insinuation about the shrink, you know, with how the attitudes were different back then. Maybe not as much as I'm thinking, but you could probably, those are probably older, way older people probably will know what I'm talking about more about this stuff. And of course, obviously that continued throughout the film, especially when all this crap started to happen to her, and Mia was questioning, "Am I going crazy?" Or she thought at first John might think she's going crazy. And of course, I do like that the priest didn't really think they were going crazy, but then again, he's a priest, so even if he didn't believe him at first, he's gonna, you know, go along with them just to make sure nothing bad happens. And at one point, LJ thought when he suggested he was going to take something, he's like, is he going to take the kid? You know, to keep her safe, but nah, it was the doll. Which, the scene involving him and the doll really does show the power of the demon. And it depends on how you look at it. Either it's the demon really exerting its authority, which is like, ooh, or it's God rejecting the presence in such a violent way to show how strong this demon is. Either way, it's like an ooh. I think more likely it's the first one, because if it's the second one, why would he do that? Why would unless it's the angry God of the Old Testament. You thought I was a loving God? It turns out I'm a vengeful God. Anyway, the film is written by Gary Dauberman, which I'm going to check real quick, see if that's the guy who wrote the first one, because I don't remember off the top of my head. At least wrote the screenplay. And it's loading. Nope, he's not the same one. Now, one thing I'm obviously going to have to mention in this review is that I think a lot of this is stuff originally created for the film. Now, obviously, the Annabelle doll does exist, so some of the stuff, probably the only stuff that supposedly happened, is the stuff involving the nurses. A lot of stuff in this film is probably stuff they just made up to have a backstory for why in the movieverse the doll is possessed. And I won't know if I'm alone in this, but I think that the actual doll in real life is a little creepier than the porcelain doll they made for the film. In real life, the Annabelle doll is a Raggedy Ann doll. Maybe it's just me, because I just think the fact that it has those button eyes that really are kind of like soulless on the face, that you just imagine that being possessed is a little bit creepier, especially more personally for me, because as a kid I had a Raggedy Andy doll, the male counterpart, but still it's that same thing. It's like, just imagine that guy being possessed. And also the fact is that the stand-in they use in the film is a porcelain doll that you look at it and you're like, okay, I can see that thing possibly being possessed. Especially after all the things that change it from its original form to how it looks at the end of the film and in the little bit of the Conjuring it's in. And yeah, by the way, the couple that in real life own the doll do not appear in this film as characters. They're mentioned, but they don't appear. I actually thought at one point they were going to appear, but I think it's probably better that they don't, because wouldn't they have mentioned the events of this film in the previous film? Unless you're going to cause that as a retcon and they decide not to mention it, but I think it's better that they don't. Anyway, what is my rating for Annabelle? Well, as you can probably already guess, it's not my favorite horror film, but I do like, as I said a couple times already, it has moments. Like, I enjoy the cinematography. It shows, at least in my opinion, Eddie has become a slightly better director than when he directed Armageddon, but then again, it's kind of hard to tell if that's all his fault or just a crappy script in the studio. Then again, it could be all three, but he's worked on many other films as a cinematographer, so he's probably taken mental notes from other directors he's worked with since then, so who knows, probably that a little bit. Now, there are a couple times where I don't know if this is actually actually how it looks, or maybe it's just a combination of the hour we saw the film, the fact, you know, it's being projected onto a screen instead of actually coming up in the screen like if you're watching on a computer or on the TV, and also the fact that because how many people went to see it at that hour, we were forced to sit in one of the front rows. It's basically like a couple yards away from the screen, you know, where it's like you have to look up like this in order to see it. Or like for example, with how I'm sitting on my bed right now looking at the wall that my computer is against, it'd be like if I'm watching something projected onto that, it'd be like that. So it's just a little, it could be that. There were moments where I'm like, okay, the camera could have been moved a little bit better there. Maybe that's how I noticed it. I'm like, okay, that camera could have been panned a little bit better. And then again, the guy's a cinematographer, so it could be that, or it could be You know, like for instance, when the camera's falling, the character's out onto the porch before the major attack scene early in the film. You can see the camera like moves a little bit, but then steady. So it could be like, okay, it could be them having to. They didn't have enough room to fully move without getting hit, and they couldn't get a smaller dolly to move the camera in, or maybe they just bumped and messed up, and that just happened to be the best take, so they just said fuck it and kept it. Who knows? You know, it's little stuff like that. It's like, okay. But still, you know, those would be like nitpicks, considering I didn't full on hate the film. I'd say probably the only major thing I can say against the film is that, one, it really wasn't needed, because you didn't really need to make a whole movie about Annabelle, and two, we've seen a lot of stuff like this before. I mean, you say the same thing as The Conjuring, but I really did enjoy that film. This one I enjoyed a little bit, but I enjoyed The Conjuring a lot more. I'd say probably, like I said a couple times already, best thing, lead characters, and the cinematography. A little bit of the pacing and the tension, but I've seen better films with that. There are individual moments as well, but I don't want to spoil them all. A couple of them I thought, okay, that's a little creepy. I'd say my rating for Annabelle, in all honesty, probably a 6 out of 5. Because I've only had not even a day to think about this, so I'm guessing that's what my rating is. Maybe a second viewing, I might give it a slightly higher rating. But I think probably the highest I'd probably rate it is 3.5 out of 5, but right now I'm going to say 3 out of 5. I'd say it only comes with my recommendation if you liked The Conjuring, and you just, you know, that's just basically the only way I can recommend it. If you didn't like The Conjuring, or you hated it, then there's no really reason to watch this, unless you just want to see how they managed to take the Annabelle cameo from the previous film and turn it into its own film. But I'll say this, I look more forward to The Conjuring 2 than I did for this film, but that's just me.